On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Jennifer. And Jennifer was the witness to her mother's abusive marriage. It's a story of coercive control, fear, femicide, systemic failure, dissociation after trauma, reenactments, and shame. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Jennifer. How are you?
I'm well.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for being here today. And if you want to be a guest like Jennifer is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, fill out our guest form, and we'll go from there. Also, at our website, we have a support group with Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. And we have a newsletter as well at our website where you get a free reflection workbook for every new survivor story. And that is a weekly newsletter, all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And we do have a content warning for this episode as we do graphically discuss physical abuse, death threats, and plans to harm children and femicide. So that is your content warning for today. And today you're going to hear Jennifer's story. And Jennifer watched helplessly as her mother was controlled and abused in every way, which eventually led to her mother being killed by her father. Her story is not an easy listen, but much of her story is about the reverberations felt throughout her whole entire life after going through so much trauma by the age of 10 years old. And we hope that everyone listens to this episode, not just for validation of what's happening in your relationship or as a child of a survivor of abuse, but also as a reminder that these worst case scenarios do happen and still happen, and to be safe when planning to leave. We have a system that's still broken in many ways, so even quote unquote leaving safely can never be done until society changes. So more education is needed, and more education needs to exist for friends, families, neighbors, your workplace, and the system at every level needs to get better as well. And those things are something that Jennifer really wanted to touch on as well in her story today. So just a really big thank you to Jennifer for being here once again. And now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Jennifer, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. So first off, I'd like to dedicate this to my mother, Martha. So really, this is a family story, and then kind of later it turns into my own story. I grew up in a really small rural town in the Deep South. You can probably tell by my accent, the kind of town where everybody knows each other. There's less than 10 traffic lights, very small town. So my mother and father had also been raised in this town and had gone to the same tiny high school that I eventually attended, and so did my siblings. So my father was one of 7 children, and there had been a lot of trouble in his home. His family didn't really have the best reputation in our town. A lot of his siblings and his dad had been in trouble with law enforcement kind of off and on over the years. His father had gotten sober, as I understand it, very late in his life, but apparently he drank very heavily and was an abusive alcoholic during my father's whole childhood. And then my father's mother was sort of, I guess, had just been made to feel like she was not supposed to really talk unless she was spoken to. She was just, had no opinion of her own, and was sort of a bitter and angry woman. But knowing that, that was the type of situation she lived in, I can certainly see why. Now that I look back at it, I think, certainly my father and his siblings did not, receive a lot of love or attention in their home. And then none of the siblings were particularly close. They were just kind of out all doing their own thing. And my father was actually a really intelligent person. He was like an avid reader, and he loved writing poetry, and was actually, I've read a lot of that as an adult. And, his writing was actually really introspective and beautiful. But then, as he grew up, he started getting into trouble with petty theft and just like pranks and, destruction of property, things like that. So by the time he was in high school, he was known to be this sort of like angry, troubled loner. He didn't really have any friends. And then he met my mother in high school when they were both working on a play that they were in. And so she was kind of the opposite. She was from a really good home with parents who were really well respected in the community. Her dad was a business owner. Her mother did a lot of charity work. They were very well liked. And she was actually really well liked because she was a really kind and gentle person, but she was very quiet and shy. And then she herself didn't really have a lot of friends because of that shyness. She also loved to write. She won awards for it in school. She wrote a lot of poetry and stories. And I've read a lot of that as an adult as well. And it's incredible sort of how wise, but beyond her years she was. Like, she was just incredibly empathetic and very sensitive. And this was like during the Vietnam era when she was in high school. So she wrote a lot about that. And, she just really understood the seriousness of that, and in a way that probably kids her age did not. Like, she was just that person who was just super empathetic. And then looking back on like what that must have been like for her to meet him, he was the first boy that ever paid attention to her. She had not had any boyfriends prior to him. And, they both were interested in literature and writing. So she just kind of was hooked right away. Here's this handsome guy showing her attention, and he's troubled a little bit, and he's kind of like a little bit dangerous. And, I think that she just fell so hard for him because I think she thought that, oh, I can change him. Nobody understands him but me. That I've read some of the things that she wrote from that time, and that's exactly what was going on there. I mean, she just really felt like nobody gets him. I'm the only one that he's sharing these feelings with, and I can help him. I can save him from this life of, trouble that he started on this path. And that naivety would be her downfall with him. When they started dating, the trouble really began almost immediately. He was really kind of cruel to her, and he did things such as breaking her things. And there's a story that my grandparents told about, they had just planted like brand new grass in their lawn, and it was all beautiful and everything. And he got angry at her and drove his car in circles all over this brand new lawn that they had planted. And, he just did things like that. He was reckless and angry. And there were just so many instances where our maternal grandparents tried to get her away from him and put a stop to that relationship. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. They were sick about it, but there was just nothing that they could do. And they really felt like there was probably abuse beginning, but my mother would not speak of that to them. She would not, she always sort of defended him and took up for him. And so eventually they got married. They ran off and got married. And they had me about a year after they were married, or well, a little over a year after they were married. And then within the next few years, they had my little brother and then my sister. And so the whole time, I mean, from my earliest memories, our home was just total chaos. My father could not hold down a job. Like, he sort of had this feeling that he was superior and just did not take direction from anyone. And so he was constantly losing jobs or either quitting them. And so we were constantly having to move from just one terrible rundown house to another. I mean, there was one year we moved 10 times in one year. We just never had any money. We were really poor, and my grandparents were always having to bring us, food and necessities for the house and that type of thing. And my father really, at this time, even though he wasn't willing to work, he did not want my mother to work outside of the house at that time. And it was more, I think, so he could kind of control her environment, and control what she was doing. He sort of controlled everything about her, the way she dressed. He always found fault with her, no matter what she did, even though, everything was his idea. And so we were just never at peace. He would hit her, knock her to the floor. He would fly into the rage over the smallest things. And she literally could not do anything right in his eyes. He constantly criticized her, belittled her. When he was home, he would get angry and break things, lamps and, plates and whatever he could get his hands on, screaming, throwing things. And so as the oldest, I would grab my little brother and sister and we would hide, under beds, in closets, outside. Like, we would just go outside and just run, to get on our bikes and just go, just anything to be out of the house. And so, I mean, honestly, to this day, I am so good at reading the moods of others because I spent so much time just watching his face, because you just never knew, but you could tell something about his face when his mood was about to turn, so that you knew to get out of there. It really has helped me later in life, though, because I'm good at observing other people's behaviors and moods. But it just really grew worse, and we were just all living in constant fear and walking on eggshells, because even us being loud or something could send him over the edge. And somehow all this abuse was really toward my mother, though, as far as the physical abuse, like he did not physically abuse me and my siblings. Like he just sort of almost weren't even there to him.
So I just want to take a step back on the abuses that were occurring here. We'll get back to that. I just kind of want to humanize your mom a little bit so people can get to know her better. As part of this story, one reason you wanted to tell it was to be in memory of your mom. So what is your favorite memory of your mother growing up?
That would definitely involve music. She was a huge music fan, and me and my brother and sister are all just like music fanatics. Like we love the music that we love, like we love it with our whole heart. And I think that really came from her, because I can remember like when our father would just be gone, like sometimes for like days, sometimes, and nobody knew where he was. Like we would actually have the best time. This is the days of like, record albums, and, she would put on like her albums, and we would dance around the living room, and, she was always like so fun. Like she was such a sweet mother. Like she really just, with all the hell that she was going through, like she still tried to manage to play with us and, help us have a good time. But I just remember like dancing around. She loved Carole King's Tapestry album. Like that was her favorite. So every time I hear Carole King, like I think of her. And like we had a little window, and like we would ride our bikes up to the window, and she would pretend like she was like selling ice cream out of the window and give us our little ice cream, and just things like that. Like I said, as hard as things were for her, like she still found a way to bring us joy. And so that's really something.
Hi, everyone. If you've been listening to Narcissist Apocalypse for a long time, you probably know I haven't done host read ads in years. And that's because all I really have with you is trust. So as time has gone on, I become more careful about what I bring to the show, especially because survivors deserve care from people who understand trauma and aren't treating it like some side issue. That's why I wanted to tell you about Rebound Therapy. Rebound offers specialized virtual treatment for people ready to work through past trauma and reclaim their lives. What stood out to me is that their therapists are carefully vetted and trained in evidence-based treatment. They pair their clinical expertise with deep support from survivor advocates who have lived experience to support your healing process between sessions. It's covered by many major insurance plans like Aetna, many Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, and more. Head to hellorebound.com/NA to check your insurance or get matched with a therapist. I'll also put the link in the episode description. So already your dad has beliefs that he is superior to others and he's controlling your mom's work. He controls her clothes. He finds fault in her for everything. Even his ideas that don't work are your mom's fault too. He's physically abusive. Your mom is criticized and belittled. And he breaks things as well. So your dad is hitting everything on the power and control wheel here. And you yourself are walking on eggshells. You're doing your best not to cause a stir. And as you told me in our previous call, if you cause a stir, there's repercussions for your mother. So with that happening, you're conforming even though nothing is actually being done to you. You've taken on somewhat of an adult role of being this protector here for your mom. Your mom is in survival mode, and you and your siblings are in survival mode as well. And this house is chaos, and that chaos is happening underneath everyone's noses. And what I mean by that is your chaotic house is residing in a neighborhood, and that neighborhood resides in a small town. So let's talk about the town, because the town here as well, we're talking about the early 80s here. The town itself is taking on a role. So, what is that role here of the town or the non role of this town? My assumption here is everybody knows everybody, even if you don't know that person or don't really speak to them, you know of that person. So, do people know your business? And does your mom at certain points reach out to authorities? Or is there not even a point in a town of your size?
So we have moved into this one place, and we shared really like a wall with another. I mean, it was a house, but it was divided into two. And we had neighbors on the other side. And so one morning, my dad had been like out all night. Nobody knew where he was, but we were sitting there eating breakfast. And my mom is making grits like on the stove, and those are really hot, in a pot. And he came in and was just in this rage, like as soon as he walked in the door, and he threw the hot grits all over my mom and my little sister. So we're all screaming, and the neighbor next door called the police. And I'm telling this just as an instance of what would happen. So they obviously knew what was going on. They called the police. The police came, they took him away. And then literally, the next day he was just back. And so after that, the neighbors really did not have anything to do with us, to the point where they wouldn't even let me play with their kids. Like I played with their kids every day. So it was like they knew about it, but it's almost like they blamed us all for it or took it out on us in a way. And I mean, I feel like the people who did know about the abuse, like neighbors and things like that, because I mean, anybody who lived next door to us definitely knew, they could hear. But it was almost like nobody wanted to touch it. Like I think in that time and place, or very rural, small town, that time period, people sort of still had that mindset, even the police, of, well, that's their personal business at home. She's his wife. This is how they conduct business at their home. And so nobody tried to do anything about it. I mean, my grandparents on my mother's side, they were desperate to try to figure out help for her, but I mean, nobody knew what to do. And the police just, I mean, they would arrest him and then he would just come back and there were no repercussions for his actions. And we were trapped in our own little hell and there was nobody coming to save us. I mean, this was just going to always happen and there was nothing that anyone could do. My grandfather, tried to speak to the police on my mom's behalf like a lot of times and he was always told, well, he has to really do something in order to, and it was like, okay, well, he is doing this, he's abusing her, but I mean, it just didn't stick, I guess that's a terrible way to put it, but I mean, just nothing stuck. There was nothing that, no amount of times that he could be arrested and anything happen about that. It was a cycle that was just continuing, and there seemed to be no end to it. And I think it wasn't really viewed the way people might view it more now. But it was just kind of like, well, this is just what happens in some families. It was just dismissed. And nobody really took it all that seriously. I mean, and nobody really just thought about, what it was really like for us to be in this situation all the time. Father's family certainly didn't care. I mean, they sort of defended him even in his actions a lot of the time. But I mean, they had grown up in that same type of situation. So it was hard for them to see another way, I guess, if you think about it that way. But yeah, I mean, law enforcement, they just weren't helping. So I would go to other friends' houses, like I'd go spend the night with a little friend or something from elementary school. And I would just be so amazed at what it was like in their homes. They would all sit down to dinner together and there was this peace and quiet and, they would talk to each other like human beings. And, I was just shocked at the disparity, between what my life was like and what their home life was like. They're just constant verbal abuse and, even when he wasn't physically abusing her, there was abuse of some kind going on. And I mean, he was constantly accusing her of having affairs, even though she barely left the house on her own. She was able to see her family, and we were able to like hang out with her family, but really, I don't recall her having a lot of friendships or anything outside of the home because he tried to control every aspect of her life. And then, what was happening with me and my siblings, like we all had trouble sleeping, like we couldn't sleep at night. And I had the most severe headaches. Like they would take me to the doctor and they couldn't figure out where these headaches were coming from. But it was just like stress. Like you're having like 6-year-old, 7-year-old with just these horrifying headaches. And so eventually I just started to be angry. Like I stopped really being so passive when these things would happen to my mom. Like I started sort of trying to stand up to my father and nothing worked, of course, but like, I mean, I was just so tired of how he was treating her and how he was treating all of us. So because of that invisibility that I had, I felt like I could sort of stand up to him. And I mean, it just it didn't do anything other than just make me more angry. I mean, I remember like I would literally get up in the middle of the night and write like I hate him, on a piece of paper, like physically write it out and then tear it up and put it in the bottom of a wastebasket because I just had to get it out. Like there was that was the only thing I could do to even I couldn't talk about it to anybody like at school or anything. And there was just nothing to be done. And it was just like even that was like a little bit of a release. Like, as crazy as that sounds. And so once like we had moved to this final place, it was just like this house. It was awful. And, we came out one morning for breakfast and like got up and our mom like had black and blue eyes and everything. And like, I think that was probably the worst that we had ever seen her like that. Like, physically the worst we had seen. And honestly, after that point, she changed, like something changed in her and she had just had enough. So she started kind of slowly. She got a job outside of the house, even though he did not want her to do that. So she started working as a secretary in the elementary school. I mean, I remember there was a male teacher, and like the principal of the school was male, and he was constantly accusing her of looking at or having an affair with this male teacher and the principal just because they were male. There was nothing to it, but it was like she was done though. Like she just put up with it, and she started saving up money secretly and she bought herself like a cheap little car. And then one day she came and got us from school. Like my sister wasn't even in school yet. And we ran home, packed what would fit in like garbage bags, and went to my grandparents. And we moved out of the house.
So during this time where your mom has had enough and she's at this point where she is now moving out of the house, your dad here is losing control. So with him losing this control here, how is he acting? Is he throwing spaghetti against the wall as far as being more controlling with abusive behavior? Or is he playing nice, hoping that tactic will work in some sort of way? Or is he just kind of watching, observing, taking it all in and kind of calculating what to do? Or is there something else that's going on with him?
Right before we moved out of the house, it was almost like he was just waiting to see. It was like he was lying in wait, like he was strangely quiet for a while. We had left him and come back before, and not even gone a couple of days. Like we would go a couple of days and then he would beg for her to come back and she would come back. But this time, like I think that even he could tell that something was different. And he was strangely quiet. I mean, he just sort of didn't have a lot to say. But once we moved out, everything ramped up to the point of just no return. I think he really fully expected her to come back after a few days, and then when she did not, and he really realized that she was serious, so she filed for divorce. Like she actually did, started actually filing for divorce and got a lawyer. And it's so crazy to think of this, but even though the law enforcement in that town knew full well, all the trouble he had caused and that he was abusive to her, physically abusive, we were made, like my sister and brother and I were made to go and spend every other weekend with him through this divorce process, which is absolutely insane to me to think of now. And then he just became more and more unhinged. Like this one weekend, we get to the house and he had us go in and find everything that was my mother's that we had left behind in the house. And he had this great big barrel with a fire set in it. And we had to all like throw her things into this fire. And he got a shotgun that he had bought out of his trunk and was trying to make my little 6-year-old brother, fire this gun. And he was just talking crazy things about our mom, and it was very confusing. And he was basically unraveling, even worse than we had ever seen him, even. So, our mother, because the court was requiring us to go and stay every other weekend, I mean, we would cry, we would beg not to go. And she would cry and say, I will get in trouble if I don't allow you to do this. But she didn't want us to go. And she would interrogate us when we got home, to see what kind of behavior, trying to find out if he had hurt us in any way or harmed us anyway. So she was just terrified. Her parents were terrified, and she just tried to really do the best that she could to comfort us and make us feel safe. But I mean, there was nothing that she could say either. Like the damage was already done, but she was very good at trying to make the best of the situation and trying to make us not feel fearful, even though we did. But I mean, she was constantly reassuring us and trying to make us not afraid. And so there was this one time that we had gone to spend the weekend with him, the forced weekend. And he got up and, we woke us up at some crazy hour of the morning and said, oh, we're going to this water park, which was like a 30-minute drive away. And we didn't have towels, we didn't have swimsuits. Like he didn't ask us to pack anything like that. So, in my mind, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Something's wrong here. So I had this terrible feeling of dread, that something was wrong. And he was acting really strangely. And so we all get in the car and I'm in the front seat with him and my little brother and sister are in the back seat. And this is before car seats or anything like that. So we start off down the road and he is going the wrong way, the wrong direction of where he said we were going. And so I'm questioning him and he's like, oh, don't worry about it. And so I kind of kept on and he got agitated. So he pulled over and used a payphone. And while he was outside using the payphone, I told my siblings, I was like, okay, if I tell you to jump out of the car, like we're literally going to have to jump out of the car, whether it's moving or not. We need to, something bad is going to happen. We have to jump out of the car because that was all I could think of to do. So we start off the wrong way again. And something in me I had a plastic hairbrush in my hand and I sat up on my knees and just started beating my father with this hairbrush. And in order to try to distract him, I mean, like, I don't even know what I thought I was doing, but it worked because it did distract him. And we pulled over to the side of the road and he sat there for a few minutes with his head down. And then he turned around and took us to his parents where our mother was supposed to pick us up after the weekend. And as we were getting out of the car, he grabbed my little brother and held him at gunpoint in the front yard of his parents' house for hours. And the police just, finally got him to put the gun down. And, my sister and I are hiding in the bathroom in his parents' house. And, we're all just terrified. And then they arrested him. And then literally like a week later, he was back out. And again, nothing happened. And later we found out from his sister, or one of his sisters, that was who he had called on the payphone that day. And he had told her that he was taking us out to the woods to kill us to get back at our mother for leaving him. And my grandparents by this point were just, my grandfather was beating down the door of the sheriff's department, of the police department, begging for help because he knew that something was going to happen. I mean, at this point, everybody was just terrified. He started stalking us. My father, everywhere we went, he was at the drugstore, he was at the grocery store. I mean, literally everywhere we went, he would turn up. So it was this menacing behavior that was frankly terrifying. We all knew, it's like we all knew that something bad was coming. And so the divorce proceedings carried on and the divorce was almost final. But then one day, my father called my mother and said, oh, I've got these clothes I want to bring you. And so I said she was the secretary at the elementary school. And this was in August. So, like, the teachers and the people that work at the school have to go back before the students, like a week before the students. So it was just like the teachers and my mom and the other school secretary at the school that day. And my father had these clothes and she came outside to meet him and he pulled that same shotgun that he tried to teach my brother how to shoot, like out from under these clothes. And he shot her 3 times and it killed her instantly. And so then he just like threw down this notebook paper full of like this manifesto, this crazy writing and everything. And he walked to the police station from there and turned himself in. So after that, there was a trial. I was at this time like a week before turning 10 years old. My brother was 6 and my sister was 4. And we were like hauled into the lawyer to, they were actually going to put us like on the stand in this trial for him and just have to relive all these things and we had to tell these stories like in court. And eventually they did not ask us to do that. But I mean, we had to recount it many times to all these people. And then He eventually was sentenced to death. However, because his family felt that because the trial was held in the same county that we were from, that he had not received a fair trial. So they hired a really expensive lawyer. Like one of his siblings had a lot of money, and she hired this lawyer, and they took it to the higher court, like the state court. And so his sentence was reduced to life with the possibility of parole. So after my mother's death, my siblings and I moved in with my maternal grandparents. I mean, we were already living there, but they took us in, and they eventually actually legally adopted us because they did not want his family to try to take us or anything like that. They didn't want any kind of custody battle. So they adopted us as their own, and they raised us, and they were absolutely wonderful people. If this had to happen and you were going to end up with people like these were the best people in the world to have ended up with.
So your grandparents are now raising you, but there's reverberations here of this that are going to happen throughout your life. So you're a 10-year-old, and then you have two younger siblings. How are you dealing with all of this, and how are your siblings dealing with all of this? Are you taking responsibility of being a parent to your siblings? And you yourself, are you being taken care of by others?
So my grandparents, as wonderful as they were Depression era raised. They were just from an even smaller area than this town even. And they were from a different time and place. And therapy was not in their wheelhouse. Like it just wasn't something that would have occurred to them. It wasn't something that was actually available to us in any way. Like I don't even know where we would have gotten therapy in this area that we lived in. So there was nothing like that going on. But I don't hold that against them because it just wasn't something they would have really thought of. And maybe there was like a little mistrust of something like therapy. Like I don't think they would have probably believed in it exactly. They'd just be how they were raised and everything. So they were still working age. I mean, they hadn't quite reached retirement age. So they still had to work. We were like latchkey kids. Like I was left alone with my siblings as their caretaker most days. So it was almost like I took over the role of being the mom. And actually, the day that my mother was killed, like a neighbor lady said to me, well, you're the oldest and you've got to take care of your brother and sister. Like that's your job now. And I took that so to heart. Like I still remember that lady saying that to me and where I was and what it sounded like. And I took it to heart more than anything probably ever in my life. And so I was honestly more worried about them and if they were going to be okay than if I was going to be okay. So my sister, because she was little, we shared a bedroom. Like she would cry every single night for the longest after our mom died. And so, I would try to comfort her and I would make up these stories to try to get her to go to sleep. And then my brother, like he was just very anxious and had a lot of sort of like anger issues. And so, I mean, I was always trying to help him. And then what happened to me is that I just stopped allowing myself to even think about any of this. As soon as I would start having a memory about my mother, I would shut it down like I was turning off a light switch. And it became that way. Like it became so easy just to shut it off. And I literally just did not think about it. And so even as I got older and like into junior high and high school, like it was almost like I was just floating detached from my actual body. Like my mind and my body were just on two separate planes. Like I was physically going through the motions of doing things, but my mind was not present. And I've read about this now, as an older person, and it was like a coping mechanism that I had developed, but it was so detrimental. Like I feel like portions of my life are absolutely like they almost didn't happen. Like high school, I remember so little about it that it's almost like it didn't happen. I mean, that's how checked out I was. But I was going through the motions. I was making good grades. I was winning awards in school. I was doing all the things I was supposed to do. So from the outside, my grandparents are looking at me or people in the town are looking at me and they think, oh, she's so resilient. She's doing so great. Look at all this terrible stuff that happened to her and she's just overcoming it. But I mean, they just didn't realize that I just didn't feel any of it. They were so happy that I was okay. It's almost like they didn't want to know if I wasn't, because everybody wanted so badly for all of us to be okay. So again, like there was nothing that could be blamed on anybody, and they didn't know it anyway. Like I never let on. And because I felt so indebted to my grandparents for having raised us, even though they never made us feel that way, it was just something that was in my mind. I just didn't want to bother them with anything. But what happens is you can't just keep pushing things out of your mind. Like eventually those things will come to the forefront. And that's exactly what happened. Like as I started to go to college, like I developed an eating disorder. So like I was harming myself in that way. And once my grandparents kind of found out that I was doing this, like that I was bulimic, they basically just started watching me like a hawk. I still lived at home and drove to the school. And so eventually I kind of just stopped doing it for then. So it's like there was just no help for that. Like I just sort of had to try to get over it. And then all of a sudden, like all of that emotion and those feelings and everything that I had suppressed for all those years, like somehow they just came raging out. Like I was like the angriest person alive, and it just came out of nowhere. Like I didn't know why I was feeling this way. Like I didn't make the connection. It was almost like I turned into a completely different person. And I had gotten married during this time. I was still in college, and that didn't work out because like I was having these horrible anger issues. And then I was like so depressed after the marriage ending, and like all these things were happening. I was just a mess. So I moved into this town and I met this new group of friends, and they were like big drinkers. So I had never been a drinker like in my life. Like even in high school and college when everybody experiments and things like that, like I didn't do anything like that. And so, like, I'm walking around with all this rage and like this anxiety and everything because all of these feelings had come back. Tried drinking, and I just took to it like, oh my gosh, it was like the thing I was missing in my life, where it helped me to not have to be in this rage. It helped me to not have to think about anything. Like it just numbed me, and I was kind of a shy, withdrawn sort of person, and it helped me have a personality, and it just all these things. Like I thought it was just the magic thing. Like how did I never know about this before? And so I started drinking a lot, and then I found myself dating this guy who ended up being abusive to me, even though I would have never thought that I would get into a situation like that. So like I had met this group of friends, and one of the people was this guy, and now they use the phrase like love bombing and that type of thing, but I didn't know what that was. Nobody talked about that kind of thing back then, but it was like, oh, this constant attention, telling me all the things I wanted to hear. And I had just come out of this relationship where I was just devastated. I had gotten divorced very young, and that relationship had not lasted that long, and I was just devastated over it. And I thought, oh, this person's being so nice to me and all these things, and now I see that he was using me to sort of like help him financially. But he was so sweet and so kind at first, like it kind of sucked me into this like web. And then we were both drinking a lot, and so like he would get drunk and then just say these horrible things, like just say the meanest things to me that anybody could say. And then it even turned to like one night he put my head through like the drywall in the wall. And so things like that were happening. And then he would be so sweet. And then he would turn around and on a dime and just be the most angry, just be furious at something that I had said, or either just really be angry at me and I wouldn't know why. And so I would just kill myself trying to figure out, like, what did I do? What did I say? And looking back, like his behavior was so similar to my father. Like it's still amazing to me that I could not see that. But I mean, this person was very good at you know, letting you see what he wanted you to see. So in the beginning, I did not see any of that until we were living together and it was too late. And like he was the one that ended it. And then I was still just devastated over it, even as awful as he was to me. And I think that really had more to do with like, I didn't mind leaving somebody, but somebody leaving me felt very bad. And that's sort of been a pattern that I've noticed about anything, like I feel like I have to have the control over it. And when I didn't have any control over it, like I didn't want that. I couldn't stand the thought of that. Even though it was just the worst possible situation. Like it's shameful kind of to say, but I was just devastated over it. But after that, like I feel like maybe I had to go through that just so that I could recognize to never do that again. Because pretty quickly afterwards, I started to see, wow, he just really manipulated that situation in order to benefit him financially and to do some of the things that he wanted to do. So basically, he just used me to get to where he needed to be. And then knowing that and figuring that out, what was definitely huge in keeping me from entering into that kind of thing again.
So you stated that this was devastating to you. Plus, there's this trauma of what you dealt with early in your life. And now these things seem like they have compounded. So, what happens from here?
It was like I was just floundering. Like I had all of this just mixed up emotion and everything from not processing any of that trauma in any way. And I just literally had a breakdown. Like one night I drank a bottle and a half of wine, like a big bottle, and downed a whole bunch of pills and like cut my wrist. And then as I was like about to pass out, I started thinking about my family and my grandparents and my siblings, and they have been through so much already. Like I could not do that to them. So I was able to grab the phone and call a friend, and luckily she was home and called the police and the ambulance and everything. So I was rushed to the hospital and I had my stomach pumped. And then because I had attempted suicide, they took me to the state mental hospital, and I had to stay a few days there for them to do like a evaluation. But like I almost didn't really tell them the truth about some things because I didn't want to stay in there because I was terrified. And I said to myself, like, when I go home, like, I'm going to change. I'm going to get myself together. Like, I'm not going to stay in a place like this. But I never told my family about that. They still don't know that. Like, I never told anybody. And so all these things, everybody should have been worried about me. Anybody that knew me should have been worried about me. But it's almost like I just never, there was just never any help. And so I just was trying my best to just do what I could do. And then, I wasn't doing the right things. I just kind of went on like that. Like I just went back home and like that was, just kept living my life. And then, nothing really changed for a long time. Like my finances were a mess. I lost jobs due to drinking. Like my relationships were kind of non existent. I mean, I had a few close friends that never left my side, thank God. And I'm still friends with this, to this day. But alcohol really became like an everyday thing. And it was just the thing that I needed. Like I was in this constant motion and agitation. Like my mind was never calm. My body would not be still. Like, and I hated to be by myself for any length of time. So I was always like wanting to be with people because like if I was by myself and I was sitting in a room, like I would start to think about everything that had happened. And it's like I just couldn't take it. Like I could not process it. I could not take it. It was just all too much. And also like I felt just worthless. Like I felt so much shame and I couldn't have told you why. Like I was this poor girl from this tiny poor town and all these terrible things that happened to me. And I felt just worthless. And, now I know that like none of that was mine I should not have been feeling that way, but that's how I felt. And so I just didn't have any self-confidence in anything. I was intimidated by everything. And so I was just always in turmoil. And at this point, I really did try to go to a therapist. So I go to this therapist, but I'm all dressed for work and everything. And I have, my makeup and my hair done and all that. And like this lady actually said to me, well, I mean, you look fine. Like you seem fine. And so I just thought, well, why would I go back? Like, that didn't seem like she saw through me at all or anything. So I just really didn't try that again for a long, long time. And I just felt like there was nothing I could do to change the circumstance that I was in, the place that I found myself in. And everything had become so unmanageable. I felt like there was no way to dig myself out of that. And I mean, that went on like my whole 20s and part of my 30s. But then in my late 30s, I met the person who I would eventually marry, and I'm still married to. And he's a wonderful person. And I mean, he was kind to me and he was understanding. And I immediately felt comfortable to tell him about like all the things that had happened to me because I did not discuss that with anybody. People knew me for, 10 years and did not know about my mom and all of that stuff because I just did not talk about it. And it's like I was embarrassed about it in a way, but I immediately told him. And he was really understanding about it. And I think that it helped me so much to have somebody who was understanding about it and who I felt like genuinely cared about me and had my back, that it sort of gave me an opportunity to sort of sit down and be calm, and like the space to kind of like start thinking about some of these things, and really trying to figure out how to help myself. And then having a calm home life like that, it was huge after I'd been in all this running turmoil for so many years, to have a sort of a calm home life and know that everything was okay. Like, it just really was life changing for me. And I started realizing that my mom did not get to live her life. And then I was wasting mine. It's like, so I kind of started thinking about it along the lines of, well, I need to live a life that I'm proud of because she didn't get to do that. It's like almost in honor of her kind of thing. So I started reading a lot. Eventually, I started reading everything I could get my hands on about trauma and that kind of thing. It was game changing for me to realize that all of these things that I felt like I was crazy, and I felt like I was just so agitated. Like, it was because my nervous system had been dysregulated for so long, like even as a small child. And like, I never knew about any of that. Nobody had ever said that to me. And like, learning about that, honestly, it was the most helpful thing in the world, because then I started to understand myself and think, you're not crazy. There are these logical reasons for why you have felt the way you have felt. And it helped me to feel not alone. And all of a sudden, I could see that these were just things that happened, and it was logical to me and it made sense. And then there was a way to change that. There was a way to come out of that. And I started listening to a bunch of podcasts. I just really did a lot of research. And the more I found out, the better I felt. And the thing that I had to get rid of, the thing that was the hardest, was that shame, though. But it's like, I could finally see that I had not been given any tools to cope with any of these things. So I was just out there flailing around trying to understand things, and it wasn't my fault. I was doing the best I could with what I had, and when I knew better, I did better. So, I eventually did do a little bit of therapy, and that was as I got a little older. Like, I felt like the my relationship with my brother and sister, because I had always felt so much like their mom, like it became a little bit, the boundaries were all blurred, like as we were adults. And I just felt like, as much as I loved them, and I felt like I needed to sort of be released from that feeling of having so much guilt and so much panic and everything over them all the time. I needed some help with that. So I eventually did go to a little bit of therapy about that, and just to try to establish some boundaries, because all the lines were blurred where that was concerned. And I do have a great relationship with my brother and sister, but I needed to sort of release myself from some of that just absolute worry about them, because they were adults, they had their own lives, their own families and everything. And honestly, I actually never had any kids of my own. I never wanted any kids, because I felt like I had done that my whole life. Like, I felt like I had already raised children, even back to being like 10 years old. That's what it felt like to me. Like, I felt like I didn't want to do that again because I had already done that.
So you were starting to do a lot better, but then your dad gets parole. So what happens from here?
It just sent me over the edge for a while. Like, I was just furious about it, because here he's walking around in the world, living his life. And he's still alive. He's never tried to contact my siblings and I, but we do know that he is still alive. And it's pretty infuriating that he took our mother's life, and he gets to enjoy the last part of his out in the world. And I would just find myself like furious, though, like that what happened to my mother happens so often. You hear about something like that probably once a week, and that's just around here. And I would just be furious. Like, part of me feels like a lot of things have changed, but part of me feels like a lot hasn't changed where domestic violence is concerned. I mean, I feel like that, people talk about it more now, but I mean, there's still this misconception of, oh, that doesn't happen that often. Like, it's rare. And like, it's not. I mean, it's not rare at all. Domestic violence itself is not rare. Women dying from it is not rare. And so I found myself just angry about this all the time. Like, I just carried it around with me. And so a couple of years ago, I was like, I just can't live with this anger anymore. Like, I got to do something about this. So I started volunteering for the domestic violence shelter in my town. And I started writing some things and putting some stuff out there. I've done a couple of talks, and I'm just like, I felt like I needed to help. Like, and it's like, this is the only way I can help. This is all I can do about this, is to talk about these things and to volunteer, and it's really kind of made me come to a better place about it. But people have to talk about it. It does make people uncomfortable, but people need to be made uncomfortable about it, or nothing will change. That's why I love what you're doing. I think it's so important. It gets the word out there. And when you listen to your podcast, the similarities sometimes are just crazy to me. There's such a pattern often with these things, and it's teaching people to recognize those patterns and to get away from that. Like, don't go down that road. It's the most important thing.
So, looking back at how your mom dealt with the abuse and how she must have been feeling as a child witness to all of this, what would you say to abuse victims like your mom?
I think that first they need to release themselves from any kind of feeling that it's their fault. What somebody else is doing to you is not your fault. You know, I feel like there's a lot of shame and the blame that people feel. They need to get past that so they can kind of see more clearly. I feel like there's so many more resources now. I mean, it isn't where it should be by any means, but I would say look to anything you can. Look for anything you can. A podcast, a 1-800 number, like anything you can do that. But you got to take that first step, because it's not only you, it's your kids. You have to try to get out of that situation. Just take that first step and then try to work it out from there, because if you start thinking about the whole thing at one time, it's very overwhelming. you know if you could just make that one phone call or try to get into a shelter or something like that, just take it one step at a time and ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And, unfortunately, a lot of times neighbors or friends, they don't know how to deal with that. So if you can try a place that's set up for that, professionally, like maybe that's a better route. Or maybe you do have a friend or family member who could help. But, I think a lot of times, like, people, they don't know how to deal with that situation. I think the important thing is just to try.
And do you have any extra words of wisdom for the adult children or kids that live through domestic violence and femicide?
The shame and everything that I felt was a huge hurdle. Like, I feel like that stood in the way of a lot of things. I was so reluctant to talk about the things that had happened to me because I felt that shame around it. So, had I not spent decades not talking about that, and I had not felt that shame, I might have been a lot further along. But I mean, what I've realized is that is not something that belonged to me. What somebody else has done to you, it, that was them. Like, it doesn't have to do with you. It doesn't have to do with your worthiness or anything like that. So I think that for me, it was just sort of realizing that this wasn't my fault, and I did the best that I could. And then the regret of having wasted those years and everything, that really got me down for a while, because I feel like I did waste a lot of years being so unhappy and just in turmoil. But then at the same time, like one day I realized, like, it was all I knew how to do. I didn't know any better. So I could not be mad at myself for something that I didn't really know how to do it differently. And getting rid of that, being able to rise above that anger at myself or shame and guilt and all those things, like, it was really the thing that I needed to do. Like, it really helped me to get past those things and be able to live a more happy life. There was a time I would have thought that I could ever say that I would have a happy life, but I mean, I certainly do now. But I mean, it was just a work in progress, and I guess maybe that's the thing, is just, don't give up on yourself. Like, don't blame yourself. Don't get bogged down by those things, because you can get past those things and you can live a happy life. But, it just takes some work. And, I definitely put the work in by doing all the research and things that I did. And just having to sit with all that uncomfortable stuff, I mean, I had to sit with it, and that was hard, but, it was necessary to do. I went back and read a lot of the stuff that my parents had written, so that was awful to read those things because it was painful and it was sad, but it was necessary because it helped me to come to an understanding about how these things had happened and why, and all those puzzle pieces, like, once they start to fit together and you allow them to fit together, it just helps. I guess the best thing I ever did was just to kind of try to inch forward in every way that I could. And, eventually I got there. I'm glad that I really did a deep dive and learned how to kind of move past that shame and guilt and everything, and, try to learn about what happened to me and how it affected me.
Well, Jennifer, I really want to thank you for being here with us today, sharing your story. We rarely get someone on sharing their story from the child's perspective of an abusive relationship, or watching an abusive relationship unfold in front of their eyes, bearing witness to everything and the repercussions that can happen throughout your whole entire life. And this was not an easy story to tell or retell. And I'm happy that you're here, that you're alive, and your mom would be very proud of you today, your mother, Martha. And you helped so many people here today by sharing everything that you went through. So a really big thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
Well, once again, thank you for being here, Jennifer. And if you want to be a guest like Jennifer was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, fill out our guest form, and we'll go from there. Also, at our website, we have a support group with Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. And we have a newsletter as well, where you get a free workbook for every new survivor story that comes out. And that is a weekly newsletter, all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for today's survivor story. So for myself and Jennifer, we hope you have a good night.